You're listening to Ernestly Speaking, the only weekly podcast that covers friends, foes, and anything that goes. And now, for your badass host, Ernest Owens. And we're back for a special edition of Ernestly Speaking with your host, Ernest Owens, myself. So, as promised, I have a special guest on this week's podcast, which I have been anticipating for a minute. You know, for those who've been listening every week, we've been following the U.S. Senate race in Pennsylvania. It's been a hot topic for many, many weeks, for many a year, and some change. But over here on Ernestly Speaking, it has been a minute. And a lot of you all have asked me for a special guest. You all have said, you need to get one of the candidates to come on to talk. You know, as you all know, my podcast is open for all candidates who have a real contested race. You know, we had Austin Davis, who is the state rep that's running for lieutenant governor, who came on. But funny enough, we have the current lieutenant governor who is on and is running for U.S. Senate. So my special guest for this episode of Ernestly Speaking is none other than Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman. Welcome to the podcast, John.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Yes, I mean you're making a lot of history with this race, but the biggest historical moment. This is the second season of Ernestly Speaking. You're the first white person who's ever been a guest on Ernestly Speaking.
It's a true honor. Thank you, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk about the race and to get in front of all your many listeners.
Absolutely, really. And it's interesting because like we have never had a politician on since Austin, and it was just the significance of this race and what it means for the United States, what it means for the government, what it means for policy moving forward. The race that everyone's watching is in Pennsylvania, where everyone's so many people are thinking about November before we even got into November. And I'm telling people, look, you know, today we're officially going to be 1 month away from the primary. Yeah. May 17th is the primary here in Pennsylvania. We're already down to the final 4 weeks. The countdown, okay? The countdown is here. And a lot of people I think the public is finally getting involved. I mean, people like politicos, journalists like myself, you as a candidate, you know that most voters are finally tuning in this important time. And I think sometimes, you know, people think, oh, well, the moment a candidate declares they're running, then that means everyone is following the campaign trail. Everyone knows what's going on. Everyone knows the issues. And with all the misinformation that's been going on social media and even in some of these televised ads, I just felt like it was really important to try to get a chance to start talking more about the candidates and the issues more directly. And having you on the podcast is an honor. It's an excitement. It's something that I've always dreamed about doing on this podcast. And you know, everyone's saying you're so hard to find out here. You know, I'm reading the headlines. They're like, you know, Fetterman, where is Fetterman? I'm like, well, I guess he's here on Ernestly Speaking. And we just had an amazing event in Bucks County. We just had an amazing event in Montgomery County. We've had multiple events in Philadelphia where we really have been everywhere. And Pennsylvania is a big state. And, you know, no place is more important than Philadelphia. And I'm just so thankful to be on your podcast to talk about, the state of play here. Absolutely. So I guess let's starting in. How are you feeling right now about the race? You're 1 month in, you know, people consider you, you know, a front runner. I mean, the numbers, you know, I'm looking at the data. Yeah. The polls have not been shaking. You've been having a wide margin between the other candidates running. And also your fundraising has been notable. I think I told someone, a while ago, I was hearing that out of you're the non-incumbent candidate running for U.S. Senate as a Democrat to have the most fundraising money out of any non-incumbent Senate candidate. Is that still true?
Pretty much so. I mean, if it's not absolutely true, I think it comes down to Val Demings and us. But also, you know, Val is, you know, got a national profile. She was considered by Joe Biden to be her running mate, and she's got an enormous state like Florida all to herself. So I think it's a testament not only that she's running an amazing campaign, but also, we have this, we're closing in on 200,000 grassroots donors. We're very proud of that. So yeah, it's going great. But and you mentioned polling. Yeah, polling's great in our fundraising, but we've always had a philosophy of running like we're 5 points down and making sure we get out everywhere and try to talk to as many voters as we can. And we just won't turn down an opportunity. And we're, like I said, just grateful for this one. So the race is going very well. We're just going to keep. Yeah, to your point, I can't believe it's a month away. I mean, literally a month away.
Yeah, it's I've been really looking closely since the end. I think January, when I started seeing the finances and started seeing people drop out the race in February. I began to zero in carefully on the race because, in the beginning, everyone, their mother wants to run. And then when you start getting to like the last 3 months, people start to figure it out and realize, Senate races are not cheap.
No, they are not. They are not. And they require a lot of resources and we're so humbled to have such a large grassroots donor base. So it's not about large max out checks. It's really about, I think our average, fluctuates between $28 and $29. So we're very democratic in terms of like accessibility. And
you there? I think we lost you a little bit.
Am I back again?
Yeah, you're back. Yep.
Yeah. I'm sorry. We're on the road, so I apologize to you and your listeners if Pennsylvania's broadband is a little spotty here. So I'm sorry.
Well, we got to get that infrastructure bill, done. We got to build back better. Huh?
Yeah, I do talk about that. Like when the lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania, gets dropped a little bit. Even on the turnpike here, we've got a lot of ground to cover.
That's right.
Still.
So in many ways, your race has been. It's gotten traction, and now that we're in the final trenches, I think there's about 4 candidates running, but there's been 3 people in the race that I think many people are zeroed in on based on percentage numbers. Yep. Yourself, Congressman Connor Lamb, and State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta. And you all are both, all 3 of you. This is an interesting race. You all are all elected in respective positions across Pennsylvania. You all hold political influence. Some people look and they'll say, "Well, what's the difference? What's the difference? What's the person adding to the mix?" I mean, aesthetically, you're the tallest out of everybody in the group. You don't wear suits often, even though I met you in a suit at the recent gun forum event. But what is it that makes you different from both of your 2 major opponents?
Yeah, well, it's not so much what makes me different. It's just what I've always consistently campaigned on and the kind of values that I've always tried to champion. I never had the expectation of getting into public office. Quite frankly, I started out as a GED instructor in AmeriCorps because I really thought I would spend my life kind of helping young people get their education back on track. Getting their first job or learning how to use a computer. And I started that in 1995, 96. And then it transitioned to being a program director in a place like Braddock, which, if your listeners aren't aware, Braddock was one of the biggest steel towns anywhere. It's where Andrew Carnegie built the first steel mill and home to the last steel mill. But now it's a community facing a lot of socioeconomic challenges, gun violence, economic inequality, healthcare disparities. Demographically, it's income challenged, about 75% Black, and I was the 4-term mayor there, and but never expected to be. I started out as a program director there, helping young people. So I ended up running for mayor because of 2 of my students dying from gun violence, and that's what got me into running public service, and that's why I ran for lieutenant governor and championing second chances here in Pennsylvania. I think that's another thing that sets us apart. I'm proud of the work that we've done. I'm proud of the number of second chances we've conferred is greater than every administration combined, and we grew it at a clip that has never happened before in the state's history, as well as advocating for ending this insane war on drugs that, as you and I know, disproportionately impacts people and communities of color. So, there's a level of, I think, ideological and policy consistency over more than 2 decades that these issues are important, and it's not something that I originally thought about, getting into, but the truth of those views is what took me in the direction that I find myself in now. And that's, the front runner for the U.S. Senate here in Pennsylvania.
Right. And so you said you was mayor of your town prior for 4 terms. Yep. In Philadelphia, we have 2 term limits. How many years was you mayor altogether? How many years?
14 years. Wow. 14 years. And we had challenges of whether it's access to health care, our hospital closed, whether it was gun violence, whether it was the lack of affordable housing in the sense of creating opportunities there. It was educational. And I'm proud to say the work that I've done, and the programming led to nearly 1,000 young people earning their GEDs, whether it was working with my wife, who, is a big fan of yours. Through her efforts, she's really made important strides in eliminating food insecurity, and Braddock is a place in the surrounding areas where, because of her work, no child has to go without formula, diapers, clothing, a stroller, car seat, and those things, through the partnerships that she's worked out. And she's also created a small business incubator for women of color that I believe hosts now 8 or 9, 13. She's sitting next to me. 13. She corrected me. 13 businesses, all of women of color, from the Braddock area. So we really, we're invested at a very granular level in Braddock and trying to bring the community forward. It's faced a lot of challenges, and I think that you won't catch me saying an unkind word about anyone in this race, but I would say that is what I think might set me apart, perhaps.
Right. So. And so, asking the questions from, that we've heard, because, Philadelphia is a different town, right? It's a different world. It's a different local landscape.
Very, very much so.
You ran for Senate in 2016, and you now run for, you're running again and stronger. I think your race is a lot stronger. What is the how do you identify yourself politically? Do you consider yourself a progressive? Would you? No,
you know what? Yeah. I would have considered myself in 2016. You referenced my first race, and that's the way I was described. But I was talking about issues based on my experience and my work as mayor of a small community, a majority community of color.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure the Democratic Party was fully there to embrace that and center it the way that I believed it should have been centered back in 2016. But rightfully so. I think that's changed, and people have come around, and I can't think of any core issue or value that I campaigned on in 2016 now that isn't really the essence of what we're running on as a Democratic Party right now. Even Representative Lamb, for example, who fairly recently voted against the legalization of marijuana, now changed his vote to vote for the legalization and voted for the MORE Act. So I got to tell you, I can't think of a policy area that I've always run on and I've always been where I've always been that whether it's Connor or Malcolm, hasn't essentially embraced too, whether that's eliminating the filibuster. We were the first campaign to call for that.
Okay.
Whether that, was for, a living wage, whether that is for, there's been some changes in some of the campaigns, but not ours. So I don't think that makes me a progressive. I think that just makes us where the party is. But more importantly, it's where the party should have always been, quite frankly, in my opinion.
So you're saying you was ahead of your time compared to your other candidates move on the issues.
I don't want to give myself, it's not, I wouldn't say it that way. I would just say that I believed in a core set of truths, what I believed was true and values. And And 6 years later, I think that's been borne out. Like, it wasn't that long ago when, marriage equality was considered radical, or marijuana legalization was considered radical, or $15 an hour of living wage. That's insane. I mean, like, but these are all issues that I have embraced for many, many years. And I never fixated on, I never checked how it polled. I always said, well, I know this is true, and that's what I would run on.
So your policies were based on the public's popularity. It was based more on just what you believe.
What I believe. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like for example, marriage equality, and when it was still illegal, Bruce Haynes out of Montgomery County he started issuing marriage licenses well before it was legal.
Right.
And I was like, hey, I'll solemnize them, and that's exactly what we did. And I ended up being the only elected official to solemnize gay marriages, when Governor Corbett at the time threatened to have me arrested for it, and all these things. And so to me, it's important to take principled stand on things that I think are universal truths, and that is one of the most universal truths, that the gay and trans communities should have equal protection under the law, for example, or healthcare is a basic fundamental human right. I don't consider those progressive so much as I consider them truths. Just like the minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, that's math. I mean, you can't live off that kind of money. And why we would allow a fellow human being to work for an hour and be paid $7.25 in their labor, especially when we know there's very little they're going to be able to afford with that kind of buying power. So
that makes sense. And I guess it's fair to say, since you're look at your ideas shaping more than just labels, like you don't just tout the labels, you tout the policies and the beliefs that you know to be true to them.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it. And I know, and if somebody finds labels helpful or it helps them explain it, I mean, that's fine. I don't know what a moderate is. If a moderate is somebody if a moderate is someone that's going to be like Joe Manchin and jam up the Democratic policy agenda or the president's agenda, then I'm definitely not a moderate. But I can't for the life of me think of what I'm running on that, even a conservative Republican would say, why, that's outlandish. How dare he? I mean, I think it's pretty factual and pretty mainstream, if I'm being honest.
Right. And so you completely disavow. I mean, I know this is to be true. I've listened to other podcasts you've been on in the past. This notion about being a democratic socialist, and that ad that ran that from the Super PAC Penn Progress, ran that ad. And you're 100% saying you're not a democratic socialist, which I know is not true. But
of course not. And in fact, they actually had to take the ad down because they know it's true. PolitiFact called it false. Right. Not, there is no basis for it. And it's disappointing when someone that you helped elect, in their first race would turn around and use a Republican attack line that they know isn't true either. Right. I will never be in a position where I'm running an attack ad on a friend who helped win my first race, knowing what I'm saying is absolutely untrue. And I also am taking dark PAC money in order to do that. I believe that ethics matter like that, and to be situationally ethically challenged the way that is to me, that's not what Democrats should be doing.
Right. And so I guess my question is too, following that, is that there's been a lot of conversation about, the relationships with the other candidates. You seem to know Malcolm, Connor. So you helped. Yeah. So you helped Connor when he first ran for Congress.
Yeah, I did. In his first race, one of his biggest allies, the county executive in Allegheny, called me up and said, "Hey, we really need your help." And I was I'd be delighted to help. And this was back in late 17, early 2018. So it's something that is absolutely Yeah, I mean, and Malcolm, like it was with he and I had a good relationship, and that's the thing. Like I'm not going to run a negative race, and because for me the most important thing is flipping this seat, and going after other Dems helps and strengthens the Republican cause. So
Right. So so that brings me up to my next question, and just the race today. Everyone had been cool. It seemed like everyone was chilling until the Senate race happens, and it's weird because I'm thinking about like all the people who run for Senate and how this race has went south in the past couple of weeks. It seems like the poll numbers might be behind some of the desperation.
I think I know where you're going with that. Yeah, like when a poll comes out and shows you at 10% after you spent most of your money on television and your numbers didn't go anywhere, and then all of a sudden you want to talk about something that was never an issue before. I mean, it's like that's your polls talking, not what you really believe, and again it's disappointing, and whatever their motivation is, there seems to be a perfect correlation between that and their polling or their fundraising challenges.
Right, and it seemed to be consistent before. I think you ran before it went negative. I would say it seemed like there was this long situation where the fundraising just wasn't there. I wasn't seeing the money. Looking at everything that was going on, I wasn't seeing the money there. I wasn't seeing the poll numbers going for them. And even after the fact, I've seen, even after a week of those campaign ads and some of the stuff, it still isn't sticking with voters. And it just seems to be, they're seeming to be close to each other in the polls, but still distance from you. And I think it's been interesting to see that happen.
Yeah, and that's true. And I just fundamentally believe that Democrats want us to run a positive race, and even if I'm wrong, that's the kind of race I'm going to run, and that's the truth. It's like if we had some significant policy difference or what have you, that's one thing, but it's just like to accuse somebody of being something that everyone knows is a lie, and independent, nonpartisan, fact-checking organizations say isn't true, then I mean that's, like I said, that only helps Republicans.
Right, and I think they think that by going on this type of level of competition and frustration, I guess, or whatever, that they're challenging you or vetting you in a way that Republicans will in November. I mean, that's the argument and theory that has been entertained, is that, oh, well, if we, what we're doing is what Republicans will do to him in November. So we need to do this now. But I'm saying, aren't you, my question to them have been, aren't you playing in the role of a Republican running your race in a primary where Democrats are voting? And we want to hear more about the issues or more about the plans versus what. And it's interesting because you haven't really went there. Your ads have not went after either of both Malcolm and Lamb, and neither of your tweets have really.
And they won't, because I don't believe in being that kind of a Democrat, and I never have, and so it's sad when one side or when other candidates won't acknowledge that, but at the end of the day, you can only control the race that you're running, and that's the race that we're running. And as you've kindly pointed out, both fundraising, our polling, and the kind of crowds that we're generating all across Pennsylvania, I think is consistent with a very healthy grassroots campaign that isn't getting bogged down by lies and negative campaigning of candidates who are increasingly being more and more challenged by the limitations of their poll numbers and their ability to fundraise.
Right. And so I guess, in thinking about this all together, I've been, following and doing my research. And I think the biggest topic that has come up that I think that they have definitely politicized to their advantage, but it hasn't really given them an advantage, was the incident that happened in 2013. And I've in my own way, I have done my own reading of various things. I read your Atlantic article that you was featured in Atlantic. I've, looked at the old news coverage and footage of it and what has been said since. And, I think what's important is I think there's been so many people on Twitter trying to characterize the event, but I feel like no one is actually, at least I saw you talked about the gun forum, but I wanted, in your words, what happened in your words? What happened? Because a lot of people, have called it all kinds of terms and different things. But how do you talk about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking, because I'm grateful for the opportunity to clarify. Because one, let me just say that if somebody heard some details, or someone's misrepresenting it the way other candidates are, there's reason to be concerned. Absolutely, there is a history of over policing or profiling in these communities, without a doubt. So of course, if you hear something, especially that's being manipulated or it's not true, let me explain. As mayor and chief law enforcement officer, I was outside on a cold January afternoon back in 2013 and heard a loud burst of gunfire coming from an area that was, unfortunately, there was, gun violence was pervasive and a challenge in our community. And unmistakably, gunfire. Multiple residents stopped the police and said, "Yep, it was, gunfire." And I made a quick split-second decision. I called 911, and I got my 4-year-old son at the time into safety. And I saw a masked individual, fully masked, of unknown race, running. The only person out. It was cold and there was snow on the ground. Running from the area where the gunfire was.
Was it snowing outside during that time?
Yeah, it had just done snowing, so there was a light coating of snow there. So it was very cold out.
Okay.
And this person was covered, head to toe, and including wearing a ski mask. And I didn't know. And this person was running from where it was coming from. And I made a split-second decision where I'm like, I didn't know where this was going. It's an active shooter situation, so I made a split-second decision to intercept the individual, and that's exactly what I did. Briefly, for maybe 30 seconds until the police arrived, and I never pointed a weapon at the individual.
So you never point a gun or anything, because that has been the thing on there. Like, they say it's vigilantism. You was attempting a lynching of an unarmed black man. No.
Not at all. Not as mayor, you're a chief law enforcement officer, and it was a spontaneous active shooter situation. That's all that was. We were never any closer than 25 feet apart, and I never pointed the weapon at him. Never once. And I want to remind your listeners, Braddock is 75% African American. And, we had a Democratic primary. I was up for re-election in May, just like I am right now, up for election. And it never came up once, never was brought up. Everybody, understood that this was about, rising for the protection of the community. And I won that, elected for another term by the largest margin ever, and then reelected for another term after that. And the only time it comes up, sadly, is when you're in a race where somebody's having problems in the polls and they have to come up with a way to try to drag you down. So it's absolutely, they know that it's not true. They never had any issue with it when they all asked for my help, or we all, worked, willing to work together. That was never an issue. And it only is become pronounced part of this campaign because their polling and their fundraising is struggling, and they are trying to, say somebody that accuse me of doing something that just nobody, including them, believes actually happened.
Okay, so let me get all this clear. You didn't. So those times in which you have had conversations with Malcolm and Connor Lamb, you supported Connor, helped him his first race. You and Malcolm have had nice barbs on Twitter that I've
Yeah.
seen. They had never brought this issue up to you prior to this election.
I mean, they were aware of they aware that it was happening. I mean, this wasn't a secret. I mean, there's been articles written about this, in the past. It was never an issue. It was never brought up in a way like this until they believed that they needed to try to lie and be and deceive and to tear me to try to tear me down and erase that.
So when Connor said on the debate, a couple weeks ago, the reason why you're not coming to debates because you don't want to address this issue. He had never addressed this issue with you in this way prior.
No, it's one of those things where it's like we're doing 3 large debates, including one coming this week. We've addressed this, we've talked about this numerous times. That's the thing. If the only time this has ever been an issue for them is when their polling is struggled and their fundraising, and they just refuse to acknowledge that they weren't there. The community that knows me best, the community overwhelmingly Black, voted me mayor and again, and my commitment to criminal justice reform here in Pennsylvania is unquestioned. So, it's unfortunate that they believe this is the only way they can gain any traction in the polls is by trying to smear me using something that no one, that was involved and that was there at the time ever thought for a second it involved the kind of aspects that they're claiming that it did.
Right. And so I guess, to just get more clarity, when I guess the emphasis, and this is what I've asked Connor Lamb directly, on Twitter and other, places, that if this is a conversation where he's making the emphasis that you have an issue with race, I want to know, what are the policies? Where does this show in your policies? Where does this show in other aspects? There was this whole conversation about you haven't gone to Black churches in Philly. You haven't talked to Black clergy, and you're hard to find, and all these different things. And so I've been wondering, what is your response to that from some of those individuals who have tried to make that claim?
It's absurd. It's a 4-term mayor of a 75% Black town, and versus Connor, who lives in a community that's 0.6% Black. I mean, he could live anywhere. I mean, his community that he lives is 96% white. You can look it up online.
Right.
So it's like, let's be honest here. Like, my wife and I live in a overwhelming majority Black community. Our record is in commitment to these kind of causes is not up for debate. And furthermore, that individual could have been Connor that day running.
Yeah.
It's like there was the individual's mess. The individual that was running from their race was unknown at that time and unknowable because they were masked up and it was at a distance. So race had nothing to do with it, and he knows that as well too.
Right, and so the other thing too is that there has been, I guess it's interesting. Malcolm is, asking for an apology. Why won't you just apologize? They say, and what do you say to that? Because it's like, people just say you should just apologize. What's your rationale for not apologizing?
It's not about apologizing. It was a situation where that there were key elements of what happened there that aren't up for debate. Mm-hmm. There was unmistakable gunfire that as chief law enforcement officer, I was confronted with a spontaneous active shooter situation, and I made a split-second decision to come down on the side of intercepting the individual. Because I didn't want this to turn into something greater, and that's exactly what happened. I never pointed the weapon at any individual, and we don't know exactly the details of what happened that day, but we do know that there was gunfire. We do know that he was the only individual that was out there and running from the scene. And we also know that his race was unknowable at the time because he was wearing a ski mask. So it was a situation that the way it unfolded and the circumstances, it's not something I would ever want to go through again. But it was something that happened in a way that I think is consistent with somebody that was behaving in their capacity as mayor in the interest of public safety.
Yeah, and so in the video, people share this clip all the time in the video, and they say things like, "Oh, you admitted you said that you might have broken the law, that that you was on the camera."
That was me. That was me saying it. It's like I'm not. That was me saying it's like I don't believe that I did. It's like maybe I did. That's not. I'm not here to decide that. But that's what I did, and this is why I did it.
And so, since then, I know the individual in question has been behind bars for another crime in Broderick years later. They did get reached out to by the Philadelphia Inquirer, to which they pretty much sound like they endorsed you. They said no person should be judged, and I'm, paraphrasing, but no person should be judged for one incident or situation, and even said, quote unquote, "Go Fetterman." What are your thoughts about that endorsement, or that, he seems to be leaning towards your favor?
All I know is that, the facts of that day, that afternoon haven't changed on my end. The people that know me best, the community that I represented overwhelmingly reelected me for 2 more terms. And the only time this is ever brought up in this kind of manner is by desperate candidates who are unable to get any traction in polling or fundraising, and they seek to poison people's views, on the very understandable and very real history of profiling or over-policing. But in this case, that has nothing to do with the circumstances of what happened over 9 years ago that January, for sure.
Yeah, and since then you have continue to get support. I know you have the Horton brothers who have been campaigning and supporting you throughout Philadelphia. They've gone to different wards, and I've seen them out and about throughout Philadelphia. Even some state rep candidates are supporting you and backing you.
Yeah, we've freed more Philadelphians from needlessly dying in prison, either as innocent or deserving people, than as anybody has, in the last 40 years. So my position has always been, my record has been consistent, both on what happened that day, but also on the issues that I've always consistently stood up for, as well as being, again, a 4-term mayor of an overwhelmingly majority Black community for 14 years.
Right. And so now that I see, one, I definitely have reviewed it, and I believe you. I think as someone who has covered race for years in Philadelphia and even outside of it, I think, to me, if there's someone who's a bad actor in faith, you can see people's actions, politics, their stances, the things that they do. It will be a pattern. And I just find it interesting that your opponents in one breath say you're a democratic socialist that support Black Lives Matter and defund the police. But then there's also them saying, "Oh no, actually he's a racist and a vigilantist that is basically an old school, type of white guy, scary white guy, in a Black neighborhood." But then I look at everything and I look at the facts and I say, okay, well, why would you, right? You silver spoon, go to, with a Harvard degree, go to a predominantly Black neighborhood, educate people who have GEDs, to get GEDs, stay in the area, get reelected, be beloved by that community, and continue to get their support for more reelections, stay in the area, don't plan to leave the area. You said if you was elected senator, you won't leave Broderick.
Yeah, let me tell you, I could live in a mansion with a chef and a gardener, and we're the only family in the history of Pennsylvania to turn that down, to stay in that community, literally to stay in that community.
That's very very silver spoon like, John. That's very silver spoon like.
And then working with my wife, we opened up the pool to children all across Pennsylvania, because one of the causes my wife has always been committed in is that children of color disproportionately are victims of drowning because they don't have as ready access to swimming and lessons as they should. And we opened up the former Lieutenant Governor Manchin pool to all of Pennsylvania's children. So, I mean, this is how we've lived our lives, and this is where if I'm lucky enough to be your next senator, this is where I'm going to continue to live. And like I said, had the choice of moving on out and living in a mansion in the middle of Lebanon County, and nope, that's not where we are. We stayed right where we always have been.
Well, that is very silver spoon behavior. That is very spoon behavior.
To your point, exactly, very silver spoon. So when it's just like, to your point, it's like, if I'm not this thing, I'm that thing. Well, it's like, well, because the truth of the matter is, and they know that that's the truth. This is the kind of record that I've always, the irony is that the Republicans are going to hit me because they already have hit me with freeing all of these people from needlessly dying in prison. They've already said that. They've already had attack ads on that, where it's like, oh, he loves getting, dangerous people out of prison or whatever. And it's like, it's all dog whistling. So
right, because those people that you were freeing from prisons were black people, mostly.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the awful irony was never lost on me that I tirelessly worked to free two black brothers with the last name Horton from dying in prison, knowing that the worst dog whistling, political ad of all time involved the same. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, I leaned into it because it was the right thing to do. And I was never concerned with whatever impact that it would have on my political career, because what happened to them and the other people that got trapped in this system is appalling. And it's not about my political career. It's about trying to put these awful wrong things right.
Right. And so, I guess in summarizing and thinking about this future, right? You're 4 weeks away. Yeah. What is your action plan? You got 4 weeks, you got 4 weeks left, to do it. What is the Fetterman campaign looking like in the next 4 weeks? What's the plan?
It's looking like it's always looked. It's like we're the only campaign that's up on TV in every Pennsylvania market, on cable and broadcast. We are going everywhere all across Pennsylvania. Like I said, we had two amazing events just in Bucks and Monco. We are getting into a few debates here. We're going to keep talking about our records, and we're going to run a clean race, and that's what we're going to do for the last month of this race. That's what what they say. The best predictor of future is the past, and the past. That's the kind of campaign that we've run, grassroots powered and positive, and that's the way we're going to continue this for the next 4 weeks.
All right. Well, before wrapping up, I do want to discuss, lastly, one really important political, issue that we both disagree on. And it's not the fact that you went to Harvard and I went to Penn. It's a real important issue that I think is going to divide Pennsylvania voters. Yep. And it's concerning to me. It's really concerning to me. So I hear that you're a Sheets fan. And it's true. This is a serious issue. This is a serious issue, as a Philadelphia voter, who has embraced Wawa. I need to understand this. This is a partisan issue, and voters in Philadelphia and across the area, they're going to have. This is the one issue, man. It's not the 2013 incident. It's not any of the ads. It's the sheets. It's the sheets.
I hear you. I will say this in an effort of bipartisanship. Wawa's breakfast sandwiches are better than Sheets. I will say that. I'll admit that. I'm no stranger to Wawa's. In fact, I was at one today, in the Southeast. But yes,
are you pandering? Are you pandering right now?
To Chew Sheet.
Are you pandering right now?
What's that?
Are you pandering right now? Are you saying that you went to Wawa because you know that?
Okay. I'm unapologetically a Sheetz guy.
Okay.
But I will say that Wawa does have a mighty tasty breakfast sandwich. I will say that. I will say that their sausage, egg, and cheese croissant sandwich is pretty darn good. That's what I get. It's pretty good.
That's the sandwich. That's the sandwich I get.
Yeah,
I
still haven't had a gobbler yet. Everyone tells me I got to have a gobbler. I need to have a gobbler. So yes. if I make it to the fall, campaigning, I will absolutely get a gobbler on the campaign trail this Thanksgiving time. So.
Listen, if you win the primary and you are in Philadelphia after the primary, you need to, be willing to make your first. Everybody says the first thing I do when I'm in office, or the first thing I do when I win, or whatever. They go to Disney World. If you win the primary, you come back to Philadelphia. We need you to come here and you need to have a breakfast sandwich. You need to share it. You need to take a picture and let people know that you are trying to create. You're trying to bridge that gap between Eastern and Southern. You in Western. You have to do that, because I think that's really dividing voters right now. 4 weeks away from the race, we gotta know if you're gonna move on that issue. You said you seem movable on that. Your other issues seem consistent, but this is something that might be movable. We might be able to move you. Move you to the left.
I will commit to that. I will commit to that. Yes. I will commit to that. Absolutely. It's Philadelphia's great. I do love the East versus West kind of fun, and whether it's Steelers, Eagles, whether it's Wawa, Sheetz, there's the enduring rivalry, but we really are just one Pennsylvania, and I think we do all agree that we need to have this seat be blue, and
that's right,
and that's the kind of race that we're going to run, and I can't thank you enough for opening up your platform to give me an opportunity to talk to your listeners.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. What is some things voters need to know? I know there's some voter registration stuff, things like that people need to know. What are some things you want voters to know before wrapping up? Like, for people that do, because there's some people that probably are like, I'm going to go to the polls now. Now I'm excited. Now I want to go vote.
Yeah, we've always been very consistent. We've always cared about these issues. We've always centered the kind of issues that the Democratic Party now is rightfully centering, whether it's minimum wage, whether it's healthcare, whether it's investment in marginalized communities, whether it is developing effective strategy to combat gun violence, and at the same time better community policing, and access to healthcare. All of these things, we've always taken them on, and if you examine the kind of things that I've championed over the years, I think you'll see someone who is rooted in absolutely in his belief that this is where the Democratic Party should have always been. It's what I've always campaigned on, and it's the kind of senator I would be for Pennsylvania if I'm lucky enough to be our next senator.
You got you. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I know that you're on the road, you're busy, you're all throughout Pennsylvania, and I appreciate you for taking out the time to engage voters and folks who are listening even outside of Pennsylvania. So thank you so much for coming on the show. And
thank you for having me.
Thank you.
And I'm approaching a tunnel, so I could be cut off at any moment. But if I do, just thank you so much for the opportunity to be on your show. And I look forward to seeing everybody in Philadelphia. And like I said, if I win the primary, we will Sizzly's on me. So
we'll take you on that Sizzly offer. We'll take it. Thank you so much. And I appreciate it.
Okay.
And May 17th, everyone go to the primaries, look at the candidates, take the election seriously, do your research for real. And see what happens. And until then, be well and be best. Ernestly Speaking is recorded in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. To stay up to date with the latest on the show, follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Mr. Ernest Owens. Use the hashtag Ernestly Speaking to tell me what you thought about this episode, and check out my website at ernestowens.com.